Before we get to Tales from the Couch, I want to talk about Trae Young, okay? There was a quote this week. Chris Haynes had it, so I haven't been on since the quote came out. Said, quote, rival execs are of the belief that Atlanta Hawks star point guard Trae Young could be the next player on a rookie max extension to request a trade, okay? Let's get a couple things out of the way. I've talked about Trae Young a lot. It's very clear I'm not a huge fan of watching him play, even though I think he's immensely talented. He is. We'll get to all that stuff. I'll revisit the timeline quickly so everybody can get up to speed. I'll do that a little bit later on because I'm going to go here for a bit. All right. When I saw that quote, I was like, if I were Atlanta, I actually trade him. I trade him this year. I just get it over with because I think that's where this is ultimately going to go. Now, some people could hear this and go, wait a minute, if it's rival execs, aren't they doing that just to mess with Atlanta? Like, wouldn't that be giving the rival execs their wish? Yeah, maybe. And if it truly is the rival execs, then you can dismiss a lot of what I'm going to say. But I've been around a long time, all right? And this doesn't really feel that way. It feels a bit like it's a message that somebody wanted to get out as a warning to the Atlanta Hawks. And if that's what it is, that's why I would say trade him. Now, I know there's so many of you that love the Hawks, love Trae Young. He's your guy. I get it. He's the face of the franchise. You're sick of hearing me talk negatively about him. That's fine, too. I get it. If he was my favorite player, I wouldn't want to listen to me either. But I can tell you this. As much as this could come back and like, I'll get it wrong and everything will work out in Atlanta years from now. All right, fine. But that's not how I feel. That's not how I feel like this is going. And then there's always the automatic defense of, oh, you're just doing this for your attention. You're doing it for clicks. I don't need them. The podcast does really well. I'm not trying to be a dick about it. I'm just stating the facts. Like, there wasn't a day where I go, man, things are slowing down. I better talk about the Atlanta Hawks again. It doesn't work that way. So to further continue on this quote, I also have been around long enough to know that I just don't know. Like, the Hawks aren't much of a threat. So even if you think you've convinced yourself that it's other teams just trying to mess with Atlanta, which in my gut tells me that's not what this is, I've talked to enough people over the years that it doesn't really happen that much where a guy from a competing team's like, hey, here's a little nut. And he completely makes it up thinking that team's going to be a mess now for the next couple months. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it is that. My instincts tell me that it isn't. My instincts tell me that this is kind of a warning from the Trae Young side of things where it's like, if this team doesn't get better, then I'm going to look to move on because that's the way this league works. And it's so funny because just the other day, Brian Windhorst and I talked for an hour on this podcast and being like, man, who's the next guy? Because he's coming. It just seems like it's a little bit more quiet, right? And there's always the next guy. When you think there isn't going to be the next guy, there's always the next guy. So maybe it could be Trae. And again, maybe the quote is from the rival exec who's just want to messing with the Hawks. I just don't feel like that's the way things work, okay? So if this is a warning to the organization, let's go over my timeline. When Trae first came along, he gets picked high. The Doncic trade looks like, what are you guys doing? Summer League's a disaster. So I felt bad for him. Like in Summer League, it looked like he couldn't play basketball. And that was not the guy you saw at Oklahoma. At Oklahoma, you saw a guy who was an incredible passer, didn't have a lot of talent around him, took a lot of bad shots because I think he just felt like I have to do this on my own. And so his success as a rookie, because you're like, okay, this guy's going to play. He's going to play for a long time. So the Summer League horror show, like that was just a blip. It wasn't even real. You didn't have to worry about it. When you watch him, you're like, okay, the passing is incredible. There's unlimited range. You know, you kept getting like, is that really a good shot? And even if it wasn't good enough shot, they were kind of going in enough to justify him taking some of these, like, look at me 30 footers. Right? The way he's officiated, which drives me fucking crazy, is a benefit to his game. He's mastered it. He's mastered all the little movements, initiating all the contact because he's smaller and his body's going to move in a way off a bigger body. The refs just go for it all the time. Again, I hate it. Good for him. It works a lot. But there was something that I noticed, and I'm pretty sure I was the first national guy to ever point this out, because I don't think any local guys were, because all of you, I saw all the stuff you would say and how pissed you would get when I pointed out. I noticed something in his rookie year that you just don't see very often. He was so ball dominant as a rookie with some guys that have been in the league now for a while that if he took a bad shot and then they were able to get a stop at the other end, defensive rebound, they wouldn't always get the ball right back to him. He'd be looking at him and be like, hey, I'm the point guard. I want to bring the ball up. And you could see it. And I pointed it out on the Woj pod. And people lost their minds because they were looking at counting stats being like, this guy's really good. He's getting like 20 games rookie year. Then you go to his second year and he's 30-9. And you're like, holy shit. Okay. He's made a couple all-star teams, gets to the 2021 Eastern Conference Finals. They beat the Knicks, who, look, were overachievers, in Philadelphia, who completely fell apart as an organization in that series. Yet to Trae's credit, the thing that I, despite my concerns and not loving him as a player, I had to give it up for him. And that guy's the least scared dude that's out there. And that's something I always appreciate about any player. It's like, hey, are you scared? Do you want this? Like, do you have those things inside of you that makes you, like, in big moments, like, you're up for it? And I think Trae actually has a lot of that. So that run was very empowering. They also got rid of Lloyd Pierce. There was a midseason deal there when he lost his gig and Nate McMillan came in. So Nate's part of the run to the Eastern Conference Finals. I remember reading a piece in The Athletic and I was like, man, this feels like just a massive anonymous source hit piece. And again, I'm pro anonymous source. If we didn't have them, it'd all be a lot less interesting. Okay. And we can say, oh, that means that people can just say whatever they want. I'm just telling you the way it works. All right. We wouldn't have any fucking trade rumors ever about anything if we never had anonymous sources. All right. It just wouldn't work that way. But in this case, it was like, man, they're really laying into Lloyd Pierce. And then you had heard other stuff about like playing with Trae. But look, it was Trae's team. So nothing was really ever going to change. They change out the coach. They make that run. And it feels kind of like the next step. Like, oh, look at this young team. They get to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I've warned different fan bases over the years. It can be really fluky. I think last year's Dallas run is kind of fluky, especially when you look at where the Mavs are in the West. Portland, when they got smoked by Golden State, even after Durant went out in 19, it was like, okay, you made it to Western Conference Finals, but I don't know that's the neighborhood you're going to live in. Denver against the Lakers, not that long ago as well. Like, hey, this is the next step. Or maybe it's a flirtation with a neighborhood you're never going to live in. And that's how it feels now, a couple years removed for the Atlanta Hawks. I like the roster, but when you look at the rest of the East and how much better it's gotten, you don't look at Atlanta saying, oh, they can take out any of those four teams in front of them. I don't feel that way. So they get rid of Pierce. It seems like the Nate thing isn't going to work out. Travis Schlenk, who was running this whole organization, steps aside or is reassigned. It felt like he had been on the hot seat for like 2 years from this ownership group. So Trae is getting his way. And we had that moment this year too, when Trae didn't want to show up to the shoot around, said he was hurt, which he was obviously hurt, but then it was pretty clear like he wanted to try to show up Nate by not showing up to the game, and that became a whole thing. And you know what? There weren't that many anonymous quotes coming to Trae's defense. I don't remember hearing any, right? So then they bring in DeJounte Murray, which is something that Trae wanted, but I also thought the front office did this to try to balance out this basketball team a little bit more instead of becoming the most predictable offense in the NBA, which is what it is. But they split them so much when you watch the sub patterns, it's pretty clear like they're trying to do more of the Chris Paul, James Harden stuff with DeJounte and Trae and letting them run it until they start together and then close together. And then it kind of turns back into what we see, which is a ton of high pick and roll for Trae to figure out what he's going to do. This front office has done a good job with this roster. So the Travis part of it, I was like, okay, but he's actually done a good job. Picking off Bogdanovich, having this backcourt, DeAndre Hunter, who I still wonder developmentally if it's the best spot for him because he just doesn't get to initiate any offense on his own. He has moments where I'm like, I think I like him. I like the double bigs that they can go back and forth with Okongwu and Clint. Collins, who, isn't perfect and I haven't always loved and feels like he's been available since he was at Wake Forest, is not a guy without talent. AJ Griffin looks like a steal. Now he went late because he's always hurt, but it's clear that once he's allowed to have the ball a little bit more, which is rare, but even rarer actually at Duke because all the talent they had there, that there's more to him than just sitting in the corner hoping to hit an open three. And Jalen, who to me was a no coming out of Duke, looks like a player who might be a maybe. So there's actually some depth here. I'm not telling you it's the best roster in the East, but I thought they've done a good job. But we all know what's going to happen here because they're not good enough, so Nate will end up losing his job. They're 19th on offense this season. They run the most pick-and-roll ball handler in the NBA. They're 13th on D, which is actually a massive improvement from 26th last year and 18th the year before that in the previous two seasons. This offense that is this predictable is 26th in free throw attempts, despite Trae getting his 8 to 9 attempts per game, which is down a bit from his peaks. They're 27th from three. And so you can talk about, well, Ryan, you're pointing out that this coaching staff isn't doing a good job and that they are super predictable. It's so obvious what they're going to run every single time. Now, to Trae's credit, he's so good and dynamic in the lob game that it's almost impossible to stop him on it. He's mastered it. He's fucking awesome. So it's a comfort default. right? It's something that he defaults to because he's so good at it, so comfortable with. It sucks for everybody else, the other three guys that aren't in that play. And I just don't know that you can play team basketball this way where you feel like you're sitting around. Like, it's not fun. It's not fun. Where is the quote where one person's like, I'm actually having a blast. This is fun. This is great. When he drags it out and we all stand around wondering if he's going to pull it from 30 feet or lob it to one of the two bigs. And I know the counting people are going to come back at me with the assist numbers. I'm telling you, I think he's a great passer. I'm also telling you, I think when you have the ball as much as some of the guys have in the league today, assist numbers don't really tell you the full story. I would submit the Westbrook triple-double season from 16-17. So the other thing is that Trae clearly wants to play this way, you know? So you can bring in the next coach. It's supposedly going to fix everything. This reminds me a lot of the LeBron stuff. Now, LeBron's a much better teammate than Trae Young is. But LeBron, they bring in athletes, be like, you know, you got to get out and run with this guy. Look at him. No, LeBron wants to slow it down. Look at the pace numbers from all the peak LeBron years. He wants to dictate everything that's going to happen. And by the way, it always worked. So why would you argue with what LeBron wants to do? The player, the star player, the guy who has the ball and is making the decisions most of the time, if he's that good, he's going to decide, no, this is actually what I want to do and how I want to play. Trae wants to play this way. So you can all dream about how different it's going to be with the next coach, the third coach, or the fourth coach. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. So back to Trae. He turned 24 in September. 2 All-Star games. All NBA third team last season. You don't trade a guy like this, right? I know the shooting sucks this year, but he's not a 30% three-point shooter. It's not going to happen. But he's a small point guard who's running the most predictable offense in the NBA. It becomes even more of a problem in the playoffs, as we saw with Miami. I think 2021 was a fluke. He's always a defensive liability. But Atlanta will never do this until it's too late. And this is all predicated on if this is actually a warning to the organization, more so than just a rival executive board in Las Vegas. Because he's their guy. He's the guy that sells their jerseys. He's the face of the franchise. He's the guy that's in every promo. He's the guy that's on the cover of the media guides, right? He's the sellable thing because his fan base loves him so much. And trust me, whenever I do these rants, you remind me every single time. Maybe he figures it out on the third or fourth coach when he's 27 or 28. Because that's kind of sometimes once you've made your money, once you've got your individual accolades and you're like, you know what, losing all the time kind of sucks though. It's like that Celtics team in 2007, 2008. All of those guys had done individual things. They were old enough and they were collectively over it enough to go, okay, we all need to buy in a little bit here. And again, this Atlanta team is not that team. But this is a good roster. And for what you get back, because another franchise this early in the Trae Young story would be like, wait, this guy's actually available? Let's do it. I think you'd plug in those pieces to the roster that you'd already have, and I think you'd have a better situation. You might not have that marquee item, but what is the marquee item really getting you, especially if he is going to get to the point where he thinks all of these failures are on everyone else, front office, coach, and teammates. And I'll ask it one more time. Where are any of the anonymous quotes that support playing with him? Like, I'm not going to argue with some of you guys about this. I'm just not. I'm not going to argue with the counting stats people. I watch it enough to know that it's not fun. And if he's going to be miserable while also being empowered, that's a brutal combination. And again, if he's totally happy and thinks it's great, is there for the long haul, and wants to make some adjustments, then fine. Keep him. And they're going to keep him anyway. But if this is coming from him, I wouldn't wait 3 or 4 years to find out if this is going to be solved.